Pat, Pat and I both enjoy history. I want to take you back to where the boys club really got rolling in the 1932s. That year there was a presidential election. The sitting president was Herbert Hoover. He had grown from a 10-year-old orphan boy to become the president of the United States. Nobody ever did that in the past. Nobody. But October of 1939, the United States had a Great Depression. Some of you older people probably remember that. The country was in bad shape financially. And Mr. Hoover was running against Franklin Roosevelt, and he was defeated. And then after he left the White House, he took the last 25 years of his life and devoted it to the Boys Club movement. And his goal before he died was to have 1,000 boys clubs in the United States of America, serving 1 million boys every day. And that goal was reached, and this is one of them right here. This is one of them right here. But I got a little funny story for you. It's about Babe Ruth. Is there anybody here that ever seen Babe Ruth play baseball? If you have, hold up your hand or stand up, will you? Did I say somebody here? Well, I was in the 7th grade at Woodrow Wilson back in 1940. It was the summertime. And in those days, we had all the big packers here, Swifts, Armors, Cuddies, the stockyards, and everything. And Babe Ruth came to Sioux City and put on an exhibition down at the old Stockyards ballpark. The fence was 7 feet high. It was painted green. Home Depot is exactly where it's at right now. And I was a newsboy. I didn't have any money, but I ran into some of the toughest kids in town from the South Bottoms and from the East Side. And I was bound and determined I was going to get to see Babe Ruth, called the King of SWAT, hit some of those famous home runs that he was always doing. So they had security guards down there in those days. And some of you that ever worked in a packing house, they had a wooden handle on them and a belt on there where they used to drive the cattle and the sheep and the hogs up to the killing floors of the packing houses. Well, I could run like a deer back in those days, and I had some bibbed overalls on, and I got up on top of the damn fence. I couldn't get over, and I couldn't get back down. Here comes a security guard, and he gets a hold of those overalls, brought me down there to the ground, and kicked me in the hind end. He said, "Get out of here, you little so-and-so." Well, I was determined I was going to see Babe Ruth hit some of them home runs. I went, hid in the weeds, and I watched him. Sooner or later, he got out of sight. Another bunch of boys were ready to try to get into the ballpark. So the second time around, I made it into the ballpark. And let me tell you, it was quite a thrill. I think my eyes are as big as maybe that paper plate there. And Ruth, he was staying at the Martin Apartment Hotel back in those days, 1940. And they had a batting practice pitcher from the Sioux City Cowboys that was throwing him pitches. And he'd hit that ball, go clear out of the ballpark, and at the end of the ballpark was some big hay barns. These big hay barns is where they stored the hay for all the cattle and hogs and everything down there at the yards. And people who just couldn't believe their eyes. Anybody could hit the ball so far and so hard. And so anyway, that was, then he came to Sioux City once again with Lou Gehrig. But then Lou Gehrig, he had the disease that took his life, so that was 7 years later. But that's part of the story. But the other part of Babe Ruth's story was 1932, when you had this presidential election. He sat down with Jacob Rupert. Jacob Rupert was the man that owned the Yankees back in those days. He was a beer tycoon. had a lot of money. So he sat down and they eyeballed each other, and he says, well, babe, what do you got in mind for a salary this year? Babe Ruth fired back at him. He said, well, Mr. Rupert, he said, I like nice round figures. He said, I've been thinking about $80,000 a year. Rupert sits back in his chair. He says, my God, man. He says, don't you realize there's a depression in the United States? He says, well, that's more money than the president makes. Ruth fired back at him and said, yeah, but I had a better year than the president did. So that's a couple of stories there that I thought you'd enjoy. But anyway, of course, Babe Ruth is in the Baseball Hall of Fame, and he's here twice in Sioux City, right down there at the old, where Home Depot is today. That used to be the ballpark. So thank you very much for this award. Pardon me?
You're in our Hall of Fame.
Well, I
I
don't.
gotta just tell you a quick story too,
Go ahead.
because there's a plaque out there that I want everyone to see after this event is over, and it's a memorial, a living memorial wall. And I want to thank Roger for breaking with tradition and putting your name on there before you died.
Well, I'm not going
I'm
to.
trying to favor him. Because he wanted, one of the things that Roger wanted to make sure is your name went up there as one of the last things he did.
Pat, I'm just going to say this. I'll do anything for you, but I'm going to die for you.